Okay, so kicking things off, we have a headliner presentation on what are the 5 things we should expect to see at COP26. Here to tell us more is His Royal Highness Prince Jaime de Bourbon de Parme of Climate Envoy, the Netherlands, who is joining us virtually this afternoon. Over to you.
Hi, it's great to be online with you. I was expecting to be physically with you, but I literally just came 20 minutes ago from briefing the Dutch Parliament about the climate top in Glasgow. And immediately after this call, I'll be running downstairs to the press room to brief the Dutch press corps on climate. So just in between, I could squeeze this speech, and I do it very voluntarily because of 2 reasons. The first has nothing to do with climate; it has everything to do with Afghanistan. I used to be posted in Afghanistan. I was embedded into a military mission as a diplomat. And I was helping negotiating with the warlords in the area, but I was also helping the UN organize the first elections in Afghanistan. And also I saw the women taking the burqas off and putting headscarves instead and bringing the girls to school. So it was very dramatic to see the rapid change in Afghanistan. And the ones who are particularly vulnerable are those who helped democracy. They had 20 years of space and of bit of breathing room, but they also are now paying the price, and we don't know what the price exactly is going to be, but it's not looking good. And amongst them are highly educated women. Now, when I didn't even think of applying or being invited to this event, the organizer of the events reached out to me and said there is a 5 all-girl Afghan robotics team which they work with in the past in Afghanistan, and 54 of their family members trying to get to Kabul airport and exit the country because of their safety. We've tried what we could. They've tried hundreds of different paths, and they have managed to get the women to safety. So I would, want to use this opportunity to do a shout out to the organizer of this event, Sarah Porter and Vidya Gunapala, because they're showing that they're not just trying to create a good platform. These are really good people trying to do the right thing in the right time. So an applause to them from me to you, and would you please join me in an applause to these women helping these other women in Afghanistan. Now, I'm sure that they don't feel comfortable with praise, because they will feel that only a few of the many could be saved. And that's what my embassy colleagues in Kabul at the airport tried to do as well. And it's only a handful of people we could get out, and so many more that deserve to get out and we couldn't get out. So I understand their sense of impact. It's been huge for these families they saved, but for the others, it's always difficult. There's only so much you can do. Now, the second reason that I joined is more optimistic. Inspired Mind said we want to create a movement to create a better world. Now, that's a perfect reason to join any event. And I loved in the invitation on the website, it says game changers, exponential tech gurus, transformation practitioners, business leaders, disruptive specialists, startup founders, investors, government heads, institutional leaders, youth activists, academics, and even geniuses actively collaborate, share ideas, and create solutions. For humanity's greatest challenges. Now, my challenge is one of those, and that's a challenge you share with me, and that's climate change. And my message to you is, we need you, and I'll tell you exactly why. But first, who am I? I'm a climate envoy. That's a diplomat that goes abroad to work on climate. Europe is good for 8% of the global emissions, with the third biggest bloc after China and the US. So 8% is a lot, but 92% of the emissions is the rest of the world. So my remit is 92%. How do we bring other countries on board with high ambitions towards COP26 in Glasgow, the climate top? And the idea is to meet the target of 2030 and not to exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, we're already feeling the effects, even though we haven't reached the 1.5 degrees Celsius. We're already feeling the effects of a changing climate. So it's not a distant future. It has become reality. Right now, there's a drought in the Horn of Africa, and in Kenya, there's 2.1 million people in danger of starvation. So there's a drought going on in Kenya right now. You don't hear about it in the news, it's there. The other thing which we did see in the news were the forest fires this summer. Europe, Canada, US, even Siberia, we've realized that there were forest fires. And then there were floods even in a country like the Netherlands and our neighboring countries, Germany and Belgium. And there were quite a few casualties. In the Netherlands, the dikes just held. It was really a fraction of centimeters, not meters, that we would have had much worse consequences. So our systems just held, but it's a bad story. And at Glasgow, what we'll do is to set the ambitions per country for the next 5 years. So I'm trying to see who is bringing in national determined contributions, so their climate plans with clear deadlines and goals for the next 5 years. And the image is mixed, but I do see there's a lot more momentum. Now the US is back in the game. You see that they are contributing back, but you see a lot of other countries don't have the excuse that, well, if the US is not moving, why should we? They have to move as well. And they get inspired by calls by my colleague, John Kerry. If he calls, it does make a difference. So there is a lot of momentum. China might come with some surprising remarks and ambitions. So I see that there is, it will not likely be enough. It never is enough, but we are making steps in the right direction. So I hope that's what we'll see from COP. And it's not just about reducing emissions into the air, but also how do we adapt to the current circumstances? So what dikes do we need? What drought-resistant seeds, etc. So we'll be looking at that as well there. And the third one is climate finance. How do we get enough money to the global south, to all the countries that have not contributed to climate buildup of greenhouse gases, but do feel the effects of it? So then the third bit is how do we really manage climate finance? And we promised $100 billion a year. It's a lot of money, but nothing compared to the real costs that they're going to have over time. And we're only about 80% of that. So there's a lot of frustration in the global south. Will the north actually contribute and do their part as well? So this is COP in a very short summary. And we see that governments have to make agreements. That's clear, make decisions. Science is our mirror. Science will tell us what is actually happening and are our plans sufficient, yes or no? And science over the time has become more granular. I'm calling to you now through a screen. So you see now with science that the pixels are becoming sharper and sharper, and we get a better image of what's going on. Now, one of the results of the IPCC, the climate change report, was that we'll reach 1.5 degrees Celsius a decade earlier than previously thought. So we need to accelerate. The impact of climate is definitely also linked to human activity. So for all those that hope that it was a natural phenomena, it's not. It is linked to fossil fuels and other greenhouse gases. And we can expect more frequent extreme weather events, as we've noticed this summer. So that will be something that not every summer, every time, but we'll see it. The more degrees we go up, the more of these events we will have. And there are parts of the world that are more fragile than others. So that's what we'll see. But then besides the government and science, we also need the private sector to reduce greenhouse gases and to drive innovation, to find solutions. And we need civil society to keep pressure. But we also need AI to support us as well. It's really team humanity that needs to make the difference. Now, why is this relevant to you? And I've been speaking to some people who really know about this stuff, and that's why I thought it was really interesting to be amongst you, but sadly enough, I have to do it now from a distance. And they came with some examples of where AI has made a difference for climate. And for instance, artificial intelligence of things, solutions are important to tackle some of the climate challenges. And the 4 examples are first, there are important areas of focus that make carbon management more efficient, transparent, and effective. And one of them is that AI needs to be integrated into measurements and reporting. Now, an example of that is predictive analytics that is needed to simulate emissions over time and carbon offsetting. And then we'll know what measures actually work and which do not. So for measurement, AI will be very important. The second area for AI is automating and maximizing the efficiency of processes across sectors. So that's really focused on industry. Now, providing connectivity, AT&T has helped to optimize the performance of Emerson's industrial food grinders. I didn't know there were any food grinders, but there are food grinders that convert commercial food waste into electricity or heat and fertilizer. Now, this reduces greenhouse emissions that are associated to food waste and landfills. And landfills are really bad for climate. You get methane, and methane is an X times worse than CO2. But they also produce low carbon energy. So that's a great example on how connectivity and AI will help these processes work better. And the third example has to deal with AI for forest protection and forecasting of wildfires. Now, an example of forecasting of wildfires is by TerraFuse, who has partners with Microsoft to create predictive analytics using historical fire data, existing physical simulations, and real-time satellite observations to forecast wildfire risk at a hyper-local level. Now, this will be incredibly useful for this summer's forest fires in California, Canada, Turkey. We had in southern Spain, Siberia, many other parts of this world. So that tech is now available. And the other example on forest management, Silvia Terra has also supported by Microsoft Azure, have combined satellite imagery with machine learning to map forests more precisely. Now, man-made mapping is nearly impossible. It takes a lot of man hours and women hours, and that's nearly impossible to do. But with AI, it is possible. And the data collected through the technology can help conservationists and landowners. And they'll use that data to manage and understand forests, to determine climate impacts, and promote sustainable harvesting. Now, these are the three examples that when I spoke to people that know about this stuff came to me. But the last one, the fourth one, is one that I know for myself. And that's AI and predictive analytics in the humanitarian setting. Now, prior to be the climate envoy, I used to work for the United Nations Refugee Agency. I was based in Geneva, but worked worldwide. And I really pushed for the organization to look much more at climate, at also find clean tech energy solutions in refugee settings. But we also try to look for tech and AI to see how can that help our work. And in most times what we do is if we want to predict and see where there's population movements that are atypical, we look at cell phone data. And we see that suddenly there's patterns of a lot of people moving from one direction to the next, and they're atypical in their specific parts of the world. And then we kind of know these must be refugees. And we can already send teams to check to see what's happening and set up warehouses and help the people that are in need because they're fleeing conflict or persecution. So that's something when we can use cell phone data. But then there's countries like Somalia who hardly have cell phone coverage. So it's very, very difficult to figure out what's actually happening. So what we've done is with AI is we've mapped out a layer of what's the population, what are the ethnic groups, what's their income level, what is their livelihood, what is their, how dependent are they on crops, what types of crops, what is the climate there, and what's the climate change in that area. What are the conflicts in the past? So we know where the heat places are for conflict, and where do the people usually go to? And we predicted, we put out a warehouse, and actually people arrived to that warehouse. So AI actually helped us with predictive analytics in one of the toughest places on Earth, in Somalia. So just to give you these four examples, and to say that these are just four examples where AI can make a difference. Now, some of these initiatives have been developed because you have given your workers 10% of your time to think about global issues and how their tech can help them achieve those goals. And what I would suggest is you do the same. We need you to look at the global issues, and in this case, climate change, and figure out how your tech can make a difference. Just four examples, how many more can we have in 2-3 years' time? Now, you might want to read up on climate to see where the niches are where you can make a difference. And there's two books I would recommend to you. One is written by Bill Gates, another techie, so he would feel very comfortable in this crowd. And the book is called How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. So I'll repeat, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. And he lays out incredibly clearly what the climate challenge is, where the gaps are of knowledge, what technology work, what don't, but specifically what needs to be developed. So I would suggest you have a quick glance through that book. And the second book, if you're not a techie and you're more nature-based, is written by Paul Hawking. It's called Drawdown. I'll repeat, Drawdown. So drawing down CO2. And what I would like to say in this crowd is my favorite tech is biotech. And it's been around for billions of years. And it's the mangroves, it's the grasslands, it's the trees, and it's the plankton in the oceans. They draw down carbon. So we need to give Mother Nature its space to regenerate itself. And then you've got with AI this wonderful mix, which we had with the forest, where you can actually find tech and nature together. So plenty of space for Team Humanity to make a difference. Back to you.
Thank you so much. That was really inspiring and great to hear. We do have a couple minutes for questions. So if there's anybody in the audience, you can welcome to raise your hand. Also, if you're online, you're welcome to raise your hand as well. I have a question, if you don't mind if I start. We mentioned a lot about how AI can be used in predictive, but also how might it be used in prevention, taken in that different approach?
Well, I would say that predictive is prevention, because you can actually see where the probabilities are of something bad happening. For instance, in the IPCC report, the climate change report by scientists, we saw that it was included, it's amazing they included it this year, but that they looked at the ice sheets, and they looked actually in the Arctic. And ice in the Arctic is different from the North Pole, because the Arctic is on top of an island. And if that breaks down, it adds to the ocean and therefore can add to the volume of the oceans globally. The North Sea, so North Pole, if that melts, it's already part of the weight of the ocean, so that instead of ice, it becomes water. It won't make such a difference. So anything coming from land into water is much worse. And they are now calculating, doing predictive analytics to see what are the extreme events when suddenly an ice sheet will shift and actually collapse in the ocean, and what's the probability of that. Now, the probability is pretty low, so don't be totally afraid now that you're gathering in Amsterdam under the sea level, but it is possible. And so predictive analytics can help us, really see what the probabilities are and prepare ourselves for these events.
Great, thank you. Was there any more questions from the floor? Okay, I think that's it. Oh, we do have one. We'll get one more in.
Yeah, it's not so much an AI question as a COP question. How hopeful are you that in the post-COVID world, we'll still see investment and ambitious goals for COP, given that we're having to divert so much of our funds for recovery? And I mean for all countries, really, because I know there's a lot of pessimism on that.
Oh, that's a good question. It's a two-side story. On one hand, you have certain countries like the US that actually use the COVID recovery funds for a green recovery. So investing into green jobs, new technologies, carbon capture, green hydro, and all these other new technologies, really betting into using this crisis and all these recovery funds with a massive amount of money to really shift the economy to be ready for the future. In Europe, we're following the same strategy, but there'll be countries that are having a tough time anyway, like India, where the margin of investment is very low and is very difficult. So what we're doing is we're talking to all the development banks that we invest in as Global North and say, you have to be Paris aligned, but you also have to be able to be accessible to the Global South with projects that will help them transition towards a better world. So we see that transition. So I think actually a lot of money is being freed up, and that can be put to good use. So we'll see a lot of that, but there might also be places where that's simply not possible or seen as not possible.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your time today.